Okay, this is a short video. I want to explain a few things. I made a video recently that was similar and I want to replace it. What I'm going to explain is some systems engineering that can help first responders in an active shooter situation. First responders I'm talking about are law enforcement, paramedics, and people like the JTTF, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, from the FBI, Secret Service, and local law enforcement federal agencies, as well as other local units like the SWAT team and FBI units like the Hostage Rescue Team. What I'm specifically addressing are issues pertaining to something like an active shooter in the Parkland school, right? Or in a county building, or in a campus like in San Bernardino where they had a Christmas party and there was a shooting, right? I'm going to address this by explaining some technology concepts that I've conceived to address the problem of the active shooter, right? Some concepts obviously are conceived by someone else, or I've been involved in the past, and the people don't identify those products as something that I created, but sometimes you'd be surprised. I was involved in a lot of technology conceptualization. One person can't do all the engineering, but one person can contribute to a lot of projects that don't always bear his name. And in many cases, that's forwarding my ideas to National Security Council or other government agencies, and they took advantage of some great thinking. The idea I'm talking about is when it comes to active shooter situations, there are a couple different ways you can address that. You obviously need an alert system. You need to identify the shooter and alert something, right? You can alert police response or terrorism force response, and that's good. That takes time. We all know that in the time that it takes for a unit to get out to the school and engage the shooter, a lot of people can die, right? So that is maybe not ideal, but that's what we have right now, and that's how we'll address these issues as a community in the near future. In the more distant future, as we have time to invest in better systems and maybe some engineering projects and architectural projects, we have some other opportunities. And we build into our identification and alert system, and then we can deploy other systems that can neutralize a shooter. And what I'm talking about is either architectural or robotic, right? And and also something like a sedative or a gas or something that puts people either to sleep or just kind of chills them out to the point where they don't feel like doing anything like pulling a trigger. There are some people who would prefer to snap around in the guy's chest or head and be done with it. And I can understand that completely. There are some parents who do not want their kids shot in the crossfire, and I can understand that completely as well. There are some people who would like to see the shooter die. They don't see any redeeming values in the person, and they don't want him to go to prison for 15 years and then be released to the community after some do-gooder parole board member thinks that he's paid his debt and that he had a bad childhood, and he's not going to be a problem because he's rehabilitated. Well, I understand why people don't want that to happen, and I understand why some people, they do see the good in everyone. There are people who are Catholic about this, and they they will fund some projects in terms of security projects, but if your project is something that involves, a lethal action, then they're less likely to want to help you either in building the system or funding the system. And that's from the perspective of engineering and the perspective of venture capital and finance. I'll say that what I envision doesn't involve anything lethal. Obviously, there is the potential that a system failure or something, you do need to engage a shooter with a long rifle or a sidearm, and that probably will always be there if you need it. But what I envision in terms of architectural modification to an existing structure is to try to build a man trap into the architecture so that a shooter on the move in your campus, building, school, whatever, you can trap them into one location by lowering a wall in front of them and behind them and blocking around them in a kind of a square or cube so that there's some kind of metal barrier that they can't shoot through. If they shoot, it's just going to bounce around and hit themselves. Some people would prefer that has some kind of material on the inside so he doesn't hurt himself. He could exhaust all his ammunition, but it would go into a backstop, and that's fine too. It's a few extra bucks. You can put them on trial and you can lock them up for a long time. That's no problem. If it's a few extra bucks and you explain that, you can pass that on to the Catholic venture capitalists who want to fund these kind of ventures, and they'll save his life and put him in a Catholic hospital and take care of him for the rest of his life. Anyways, or just a state hospital with a lot of Catholic workers. When it comes to that, there are problems. In the classroom, a guy goes into a classroom with a weapon and starts opening up on the classroom. It might be more difficult to, trap him somewhere. In a hallway, you can, move. You can either have prearranged shields that drop down in front and behind him, or you can move shields into position on some kind of track conveyor system and drop them in front and behind. There are a lot of different types of architectural engineering concepts that you would kind of have to explore to find the right one. It's like Donald Trump's wall. He doesn't just have one picture. He put up a bunch of different barriers, and then he wanted to test each one to see which was best. And, you can be against a wall or for the wall, but you should understand that's a good engineering principle, that you should look at a few options and see which one's going to work for you the best. And then there's the trap. The man trap is probably the best. A lot of people just like to see them fall through the floor somewhere and then be trapped, and that's fine too. One thing I'll say about the trap is you might want to pump some gas in there, sleeping agent, and a sleeping agent could be useful in, putting the guy down for a short period of time, right? You could use anesthesias or antipsychotics. What you want is something that acts very quickly and lasts long enough for you to get in, grab the weapons, and get the guy out of the building into a secure facility, and something that's not going to affect the first responders. Another concern is the effect on other students and teachers and people of responsibility. So, you don't want to drug everyone in the school to get them, so a system that gasses the whole campus is probably not going to be something the parents are interested in. If you look to the Moscow movie theater terrorist incident involving Chechen rebels, they used gas, a Spetsnaz or somebody used gas on the students. I mean, on the movie theater goers, and they killed some Chechens and they killed some movie theater goers unintentionally, I guess, from the gas. And they were able to, rescue a lot of people, but the gas wasn't, calibrated for health concerns. So you'll need something that just kind of puts people to sleep. My advice in the long run is that we legalize marijuana for purposes like that and medical purposes. If you had some type of legalization, you could do research on it and you could find some type of hemp or marijuana product that could be used for sedation. And that could be used in a psychological setting or in a tactical hostage rescue kind of setting, active shooter setting. And in a man trap, basically, my kind of concept with that is to pump in some gas and put him down, pull him and the weapons out, and secure the situation, right? The person that you're going to need to assist you on that is not me. I'm not an anesthesiologist or a psychiatrist. But psychiatrists and anesthesiologists who do research on drugs could provide useful research in a place like Harvard Medical School or Columbia or something to get you the right serum, the right gas that will put them down and not everyone else. And you need something that you can pump in their chamber. You can shield yourself with protection, maybe with a gas mask while you're in close proximity. Something that's not going to, it's the way you have to think about it is how many grams per liter or milligrams per liter or micrograms per liter of this stuff do you need to put him down. And then when it is when it escapes in the atmosphere of the entire campus or school or in the ventilation system, is it going to make people tired, or is it going to be innocuous, where it doesn't harm anybody, it doesn't do anything to anybody. And there are some other ways to deliver a dose, a little bit trickier, involve more engineering. It's like the Insectocopter approach. The CIA and other intelligence agencies around the world have developed little microbotic devices, microbots. The Insectocopter is one of them. It's a small insect, something like a fly or a dragonfly that flies around and can deliver a dose. The Insectocopter could deliver either a lethal or non-lethal dose. And in most cases, you'd probably just want to resort to a non-lethal dose of some kind of sedative that could put your shooter down real quick and put you back in control of the situation as a first responder. So the Insectocopter is one way, the man trap is another. Either way, you're going to need some kind of sedative and probably some research with anesthesiology and psychiatry, because psychiatrists are usually pretty familiar with the drugs that put people down, but maybe not for surgical purposes. And a lot of their drugs are less like the Haldol that they use and the Ativan. Those drugs are not as dangerous maybe as an anesthesia that say a surgeon puts somebody under the knife under while they're on it. And the way I think of it is like when you go in for surgery, they ask you a whole bunch of questions about seizures and anesthesias and reactions to allergies and drugs. When they go into the psych hospital, they know a medical history on somebody, but somebody who's spazzing out, they just grab the shot and they give it to them. And usually, they put them in the room or whatever for a few minutes. The nurse goes and draws the dose and calls the doctor. And it's just a cursory review of the medical records. Those things are safe enough. that most people can handle. There are a few people who have some conditions, neuroleptic malignant syndrome or something like that, that they do have concerns about. But people on the radar, you're going to be able to access medical records, and you could have a variety of doses available. And where would you keep these insectocopters? Well, you could keep them with the SWAT unit or something like that, but then you have a problem with response time, right? Or you could have like a vaulted area in the school corridors and in the classrooms where they kind of swarm out of and overwhelm an attacker. There are also other alternatives. You could probably spray something in the attacker's face, like pepper spray or something, but a agent that temporarily blinds the attacker. There are probably some things that go in through the eyes that maybe could disorient, make them fall down, and somebody could recover the weapon. There are a lot of different, serums and poisons and, gases and medicines that you could use. Selection and testing is important. And then you have to, you want to test it for its, what do they call that? Its efficacy. You want to make sure it's got efficacy, right? So that it's useful for your purpose. So you have structural changes you can make, architecture, creating man traps. You have anesthesia, and you have a means of delivery, either in ventilation to the man trap, or in something like an insectocopter or some kind of grenade or something that you use. But most parents out there, they don't want their kids shot in the crossfire, and they don't want their kids shot by a school resource officer. So they want a better option, and as far as how do you monitor and alert, those kind of systems are best done by some pretty high performance computers, supercomputers specifically. You can cluster computers, that is okay, but I think most schools can't afford a real high performance computer like they have in New York City. And they have a computer in New York that monitors Times Square and other areas, the bus station, train station, looks for people doing suspicious things, like dropping a package and leaving it there. When they do that, they alert a police officer to go check that out, or an intelligence officer, and they bring the dog in if they have to. And the computer tracks the suspected terrorists wherever they go. And so that kind of system, I don't know how effective it is, but they have supercomputers that do behavior analytics, and that's important because if you can do it in Times Square, you can do it in Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School or any other high school in America. And there's 3,000 counties or so in America. I imagine there's usually at least one high school in every county in America, probably, right? So you're probably looking at several tens of thousands of high schools in America, maybe more. In big cities and stuff, there's 10s, 20s, 30s of high schools. I don't know. But so you probably have in the tens of thousands of high schools in America. And you probably can't afford to put a supercomputer in every high school, plus that they become targets. Supercomputers used to crack codes, and people like to have access to those just for the purpose of exploiting the financial system or cracking into government systems or whatever. And sometimes they're on research campuses and universities, but as far as servicing the needs of the education community, that seems like a funding thing for the Department of Education. The Department of Education could provide a centralized data and data processing and data warehousing for all the schools in the country. it's important to consider that you don't just need a supercomputer to analyze the situation. You need a computer to, activate a response to the situation, even if it's just a public safety response. I know there's a lot of brave people. It's not just a public safety response, it's a public safety response, right? I'll say that the right way. In terms of the response, in terms of the robots, there are some things to consider. There are a lot of opportunities, I think, in terms of small business when this comes in, because every school is a little different, every county building is a little different, every campus is a little different. And programming all these robots and insectocopters and man traps and everything to respond the right way at the right time and interface with the supercomputers is it's a chore. It's a lot of programming, and it seems like you could run a data warehouse, a data site, big data center, and a large high performance computing center in several places around the country, regional centers that service communities. It could be for public safety, and it could be for other things like schools and state buildings and things like that. And you could get a joint venture going between the federal government and the state government, things that involve corporate. That's a thing with the corporations. But what I would say is that it's important to kind of collect a lot of data that is used to train machines, right? Train robots, whether it's a bomb squad robot or some kind of insectocopter or whatever. You kind of need a real good virtual map of everything, all those buildings and things. I watched an active shooter drill in up north, and they were walking through a building with their weapons, a little patrol through the building trying to find the active shooter. Everybody should have had a body camera on, and the active shooter should have had a body cam. Anytime they walk through the county buildings and do something, it's valuable data for a police officer to collect as much data as they can on different locations. Some people would say, it's evasion in my house or whatever, but in terms of other locations like public places, public buildings, schools, hospitals, all that, those cops should have as much data and video as they could use, and then they need someone who works a database to be able to feed it to either the law enforcement community or to a machine that's responding, right? So the machine needs it needs data, and the what it needs is it needs data about previous actions, right? And that could be a drill or something. It also needs data about the previous environments, right? So when I say environment, what I mean is like the building, and like where the chairs are, tables are, where the windows are, those kind of things. The computer needs all that information to feed it to a robot or something, or even to a hostage rescue team, and it queues up the right information based on the situation, right? The situation, context, environment. So if, say, the environment has changed, the computer can recognize that and adapt what kind of actions need to be modified to address the new situation, the new context, the new environment, right? In terms of a computer, in terms of a robot, they say, oh, well, this is autonomous, right? And it figures out where it needs to go and what it needs to do. But the more data it has at its disposal, then it can, kind of look at what was there before, what is there now, and compare and contrast until it gets to the right solutions in terms of its maneuvers and actions. And basically, when it comes to a robot, those are the two things it can do: maneuver, action. And it can also do one more thing that's important: it can interact, right? And interactive is where it speaks with people, has input and output, right? In that sense, it's like a computer. In the maneuver and action, it's like a robot, okay? So that's where I would go with that. There are a lot of opportunities for the business community. There's the opportunity to monitor and alert. There's the opportunity to build robots and man traps. There's an opportunity to research drugs and other types of anesthesias. And there's an opportunity to do a lot of machine learning, AI, and other types of programming in the form of APIs, application programmer interfaces, so that you can connect the hardware, the robots and man traps, to that monitoring system and that alert and reaction system. You know what I'm saying? So those man traps and those robots, the insectocopters and things, they need to be kind of linked together, or they can't be really that autonomous. So that linking is done, the linking between hardware and software, or operating systems and hardware, is done by software engineers, right? It's a little bit different than like building a web page and designing an e-commerce platform. It's designing hardware. It's more like designing the software so your printer works with your computer. They used to call them printer drivers. Or so your mouse works with your computer, or any mouse works with your computer. Or your display works with your computer, or any display works. They have to build a driver for each display, or a driver for certain classes of displays that are standardized. The same goes for, interfacing robots with an operating system and a kind of a cloud-based data and some cloud-based supercomputing that can assist, some assistive computing that supports a robotic response. So those are, that's my 10 cents. It's 27 minutes and 30 seconds worth of 10 cents. I hope you enjoy it.